That's right, you're 3 minutes early. You know what Don Tillman and the Rosie Project would have said, yeah, early arriving is a bad thing. You know, the cumulative effect of early arrivals is an incredible waste of time. So you are the most efficient user of time here so far. I do a terrible thing sometimes. Sometimes we start on these events, I start right on time and in fact, leave a little time for the latecomers to arrive. So I say, okay, we're going to leave the latecomers 5 minutes, but I'm going to tell you a little story about something. I'll tell you about the Rosie Project and when it's going to be made into a movie. And I tell them that, and I say, you know what? Anybody who comes late now, I know that the first question they're going to ask is, why didn't you mention the Rosie Project in the movie? And we'll know straight away that they were latecomers, okay?
So when is the movie coming out? Just before?
The Rosie Project movie is coming out when Sony Pictures feel like it. No, their trouble is it's a romantic comedy, and Hollywood sees a romantic comedy as needing to have A-list actors, A-list person to play Don, and A-list person to play Rosie. So you've got to find the right actors who are going to work romantically opposite each other and who are available at the same time and want to do it. And that's a pretty difficult jigsaw to put together. We've gone close. We had Jennifer Lawrence to play Rosie. We've had Ryan Reynolds to play Don, but not at the same time. And we've had, you just don't want to know, Richard Linklater to direct and all sorts of good things. Now, who's having trouble following my Australian accent and fast speech? A little fast? I can slow it down. I can slow it down a little, okay? I can slow it right down if you like. But the trouble is, the more I slow down, the more the accent's going to come on. I'm not sure I can help that. I'll do my best to be clear.
Okay, I'll open with an introduction because it's now 1901. And I think I'll have to only introduce myself because everybody knows who you are. So my name is Rana Verbin, and I'm an editor, translator, and currently I own a small publishing house, Arvei Nachal Willows, together with Yediot Books. And perhaps as a translator, the first thing that I can say to Graham, I said it already, but to everybody, is that the translation is really good. I really liked it. I read the book first in English, only then in Hebrew, and I didn't even find myself translating back as I read, which always happens. So I think you should be happy, and you should be able to read it in Hebrew just as well as in English. Although I'm sure in English it's better.
Well, that's a wonderful authentication to hear, because, of course, I don't even know which way up to hold the Hebrew version. So,
yeah. So, and also I should say that Graham Simsion wrote this book together with his partner Anne Buist, and that it's a book about traveling the Camino. The Camino de Santiago in Spain, or actually in this book from France to Spain, so it's the longer version of the Camino, of the route, and they did it walking as it should be done, and carrying their own packs as it should be done, and it's based, you could say, on a partially true story in the fact that they actually did walk the Camino.
That's true, yeah.
Now I hand the ball to you, and I want you to just say a few words about, if you can, about the real travel before we go on to the book and the fictional part of it, to say something about the reality that it's based on.
Yeah, okay, so let me tell you about the real journey, which is, I won't do very well because it's usually my wife's job. Anne, my wife, normally gets up and says, I'm going to tell this part because I do it better than you, so you won't ever know that, except that I told you. Okay, so back in about 2010, or 2011, we were in a little village in France, and we were spending our long service leave. You get to take quite a long time off as a reward for working for quite a long time in Australia. So we had some time, extended time off. And my wife spotted on a lamppost a little sticker in the image of a scallop shell. And, checked it out, and we discovered that it was the symbol of the Camino de Santiago de Compostela, the famous pilgrim's walk in Spain. And we were in the middle of France. Because when people talk about the Camino, who's heard of the Camino here? Okay, great. I mean, we're talking about a Catholic pilgrimage, and I'm in Israel, so I'm just making sure. They think of walking from the French-Spanish border at Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port through to Santiago de Compostela. It's about 800 kilometres. It's a big, long walk that people take for all sorts of reasons. These days, it's been since the 9th century. These days, less often for religious reasons, but sometimes it's for very strong religious reasons. But that's the walk they think of. But of course, back in the 9th century, when this walk first started, they didn't all start from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. It wasn't just a walk for people from that town. It was a walk for people from all over Europe. And Saint-Jean-Pied...
One of the loveliest parts, I think, is that you mention, or your wife mentions, I don't remember, people actually opening their front door with their pack and then just leaving their house and then starting the walk just from their front door.
Well, in fact, that's what everybody had to do. In the 9th century, you were at home, you had to walk out your front door, and you had to find your way, typically to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, which was a gathering place. So there were all these little tributaries, rivers that led to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, all these paths, and all these smaller paths that took you to the bigger paths and so on, and also some alternative routes. I mean, if you were coming from Portugal, you would come a completely different way, and there were some alternative routes because of bandits and so forth. So all of these routes sprung up. So this scallop shell, you could find that anywhere in Europe. And if you follow that scallop shell, which will have an arrow on it pointing, you just keep following that scallop shell to the next one, and after a few months you end up in Santiago de Compostela. So here we were, we had some time, and we thought, what the heck, let's just walk a little bit of this route to get a sense of it. Let's pack a backpack, let's walk to Le Puy-en-Velay, which is 2 weeks walking. Let's see if we can do it. And we got to Le Puy-en-Velay. Well, let me show you. I've got a little video here that'll show us in 2011 walking out the door of the place we were staying in central France near the town of Cluny. In fact, let me just stop for a second. So don't start it, okay? So this is Santiago de Compostela. All caminos lead to Santiago de Compostela. And this is where we were, up in Cluny. So this is the famous Camino Frances, the most popular route. It's almost a rolling party. There's so many people. 300,000 people finish that or some part of it every year. A lot of them just walk the last 100 kilometres to get their certificate. And this is an alternative route, the Camino del Norte, the northern Camino. So we were starting off right up there in Cluny, and our goal was to walk as far as Le Puy-en-Velay, 2 weeks walking. So I won't start it yet. What you're going to see when this opens is a man giving us our passports, because in order to walk, you need a little document, a credential, they call it, or passport, which gets you access to the lodges, to the hostels, and also every night, wherever you stay, even at a hotel, you get a stamp on it to prove that you were there, and that becomes your document, just like you collect passport stamps. So the guy who's stamping him, his name is Monsieur Sauty, he said to it, and he appears in the book as a character, Monsieur Chevalier, much extended from what he started as.
And also in the book, you also start from Cluny, and the characters also didn't know that they were going to go on this journey.
Yeah, yeah.
So you used your own. I mean,
I'll tell you what we stole from this. There are all sorts of things. But Monsieur Sauty gave us our passports, and he said there are only 3 things are certain on the Camino. The first is blisters. He said the second is that when you see the cathedral, and we thought, well, we're not going to get that far, but it was interesting. When you see the cathedral in Santiago, he said, you will cry. And he said, thirdly, the Camino will change you. One Camino, and off you went. So we're going to show you a little video. It's about 4 minutes, and it's mainly Anne, because I shot it, of us walking out the door, and I'll just narrate it as we go. So hit it. So here we are getting our passports. Don't worry about the sound on this. And we started in pretty cool weather. This was February. Yeah, it got a little cool. It's not technically difficult walking. The real challenge is just how far it is. This is us coming into Le Puy-en-Velay. So this is... Oh, no, sorry, this is Conques. We got to Le Puy-en-Velay and we thought, let's keep walking. So we kept walking. We decided we'd walk all the way to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, all the way to the border. As you can see, it's scenically quite beautiful, although it's built up. It's a built environment. And this is Anne, of course, who should be sitting there. Coming into Basque country. This is Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, and we got here and we thought, you know what, let's keep walking all the way to Santiago. But we didn't want the rolling party, so we took the northern route, the coastal route, with its beautiful beach views. Oh, you'll see some scallop shells. I'll sneak a few into the video in a minute. Oh, crosses everywhere. Those are yellow arrows. So in Spain, as well as the scallop shells, they painted yellow arrows to point the direction. And as you can see, it's a mixture of some rural, some urban, some developed, some more natural environment, and drying your clothes on the back of a pack. You only take one change of clothes. And was carrying about 6 kilograms. I was carrying about 9, including my computer. And here we turned inland, scallop shell, we turned inland onto the Camino Primitivo, one of the oldest walks. Yeah. Oh, come on, you can do it. It must have got wet. We won't spend too long making this work because we're not far from the end at this point. We're on the Camino Primitivo, as I say, one of the earlier alternative routes. You know what? Let's just suspend it there. If you can't get it to work, you can't get it to work.
But it's impressive that you actually carried your own bags the whole way.
Yeah, look, let me just preempt the very last bit. You see Anne arrive at the Grand Cathedral and she looks up, and I was waiting for that moment and burst into tears. So she didn't get neither of us got any blisters, but she certainly cried when we saw the cathedral.
Why, can I ask? Because of the effort?
Yeah, look, it's hard to describe, but it took us 87 days of walking, and it's a long time. You can't even think about getting there, because you literally have to take it one day at a time, because every day, if you got up in the morning and said, oh man, I've just only got 840 kilometres to go or something, you just can't even think like that. You half killed yourself walking 25 yesterday. You could just say, all right, today it's 27 or 28 or 41. I can do that. All I'm thinking about is today. When it's done, you celebrate and you then start thinking about the next day.
And did you plan to write about it as you were walking or before?
Okay, you saw that snow at the beginning. So in the first 2 weeks, as we walked to Le Puy-en-Velay, we were on a feeder route for a feeder route. We were, a real tributary of the stream, and it was off-season. They only get about 6 people a day walking that in the high season, and we were in winter. When we stopped at hostels, we were often the first people who'd walked all year on that, stayed all year at that hostel. We met only one other walker by day or by night. He was a 19-year-old Belgian guy, and he'd been walking a long time, and he wanted from Belgium, and he wanted some company. And we talked a bit, and he got to know us, and he said, you both want to be writers? He said, I've got a solution for you. You should write a novel together. obviously knew nothing about fiction and how it's written. You should write a novel together. It should be set on the Camino. And he'd got to know us pretty well, and he'd realised we were perhaps a little different from his parents. And he said, but probably the same age, and he said, and it should be a love story about old people.
So that's what you did.
So that's what we did. We had a whole lot of stuff. I hadn't even written the Rosie Project then. So I went back, I wrote the Rosie Project, and published 10 books of erotic fiction for women, just practicing. And then published her first crime novel. So she started writing crime, and so she was now a published author in her own rights, which was good because it meant I wasn't just saying, come on, I'll let you join the ride. We were equal partners. And then we wrote this.
So you wrote this actually after the publication and the success of the previous books. And then did you go to do the Camino again before you wrote it? Or because it's written in the book that you've done it twice?
Well, you know the answer. But yeah, look, we got to a certain point with it and we decided we'd walk it again as a research project, making it tax deductible.
So crazy.
But this time we walked the same route, almost exactly the same route in France. We took a couple of little variations. And then when we got to Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port, instead of cutting up to the coast, we took the popular Camino Frances, partly because we knew people would ask, how does the northern route compare? And we needed to be able to compare. And partly because we knew we would see a lot of people on that other route, and we wanted their stories. We wanted lots and lots of stories that we could put into the book. We wanted characters that we could put into our big character pot and mix up.
So the characters that we meet in the journey in the book are real characters that you've met?
They are mixtures of real characters. There are a little bit of this person, a little bit of that person.
Hilarious characters, I have to say.
Well, the Brazilian women, I was standing outside a bar, waiting for it to open or something like that. And this tall woman came up to me and she said, have you seen, her English was just so, have you seen 4 chicas? And it was just, she must have been 45, 50 or so, and just saying 4 chicas. And it was just so distinctive. And we found the other 4 Brazilian women, and they just became the chicas. And we would connect with them. It was on our first
The Camino
first walk.
party girls.
They were. One of them carried an umbrella, like a parasol, and they were the party girls from the Camino, yeah.
And so when you did the journey the second time, you did it with your laptops while actually writing bits and pieces? Or?
We only took one laptop. We took my laptop on both journeys. And, we say in the book, everybody does the Camino their own way. And I had an ultralight laptop, about 800 grams. I took the same one on the second one, even though it was completely obsolete. It was the lightest one I could get my hands on. So, that and the charger, I cut the cord down so it was only this long. I mean, you try to lose the weight. But yeah, and on both Caminos we took that.
It's interesting to me to, I mean, of course, as someone who's working with books, I'm always wondering, how can you write a book when you're 2 different people? And I guessed when I read it that each of you wrote their own character. I mean, that she was the woman and you were the man. And am I right? Or?
Well, that game when one person writes a sentence and then it gives it to the next person, they write a sentence? Yeah, we didn't do it that way. we would have gone crazy. Yeah, there'd have been no story.
I was thinking, did she write a chapter and then you had to progress from there and then you surprised her? And then
that would have been the equivalent, and no, we would have been divorced by now. That would have been, it would have been all over. No, so what we did, we've always planned our stories together. So the Rosie Project, I was really sort of bouncing it off her, but by the time we got to her crime books and The Best of Adam Sharp and books like that, we collaborate. We just talk over drinks and that. And obviously, it's one person's book. This one became much more of an equal collaboration. So we had the plan for the book scene by scene before we did the second Camino. So the first Camino, we had it all planned out scene by scene, like a screenwriter would do, because I used to be a screenwriter. And you one card per scene, it's all laid out. And I said, well, so who gets to write it? Oh, hadn't thought of that. So what we decided was we would write a book each. Anne would write the whole story from the female character point of view. So if I can just a little bit of information of the story we planned. My head was full of romantic comedy because of writing the Rosie Project. Romantic comedy is actually unusual in books. It's much more of a movie, much more of a movie thing. But my head was full of writing a book, novel, romantic comedy. I said, well, let's make it a romantic comedy. That's what our guy said. It's a love story, etc. So we wanted two really different characters. So we imagined that the female character would be walking the Camino for spiritual reasons. And she would be a very spiritual person, not religious in a conventional sense, but spiritual in terms of listening to the universe and fate and all those sorts of things. A little naive, smart, but not knowing much about the world around her. So she was American, so that was fairly obvious. So she's from California, she's a bit flaky, and her husband has just died suddenly. So she's just shocked by all of this and just needs to grieve, to get her head back together, understand why the universe did this to her. Then the guy, we wanted to be the complete opposite. So Martin is a Brit, he's recently divorced, bitter. He gave all his money to that woman and she didn't give it him back. So he's decided he's going to rebuild his finances. He's invented a cart, he's an engineer. He's invented a cart that you pull behind you instead of carrying a backpack. And he's going to walk the Camino to prove that his cart works. So he's doing this for commercial reasons. He has planned it like an assault on Everest. He has got the long list of every single thing, the emergency whistle, the whole deal. And Zoe, female character, she just says, well, how hard can walking be? I'm going to just walk out the door with my running shoes, my trainers, and start walking. So they're two very, very different people who are going to do this walk. So what was the question again?
So I was wondering if she wrote her
yeah. So what the idea was, Anne would write the whole book from Zoe's point of view, and I would write a whole book from Martin's point of view, and a couple could buy the two books. You got it? See, you're laughing because you think what a dumb idea that is. That's exactly what our publisher thought after we'd written the two books. So we'd written his and hers. The idea is you buy one each, you read his, you read hers. You're saying, oh, this Martin, what a dork. And he's saying, no, he's a smart guy. Whatever. And then you swap books maybe and read the other one. Our publisher thought it was the stupidest idea he's ever heard. So we thought, no, we are right, you are wrong. We sent it out to 3 couples who we trusted, and they came back and said, we love the story. Really good. But what we did was, I started reading the Martin one, she started reading the Zoe one. After about an hour or so, we swapped books, and then we swapped back. Hey, you're not supposed to do that. Anyway, they all did that. So we realised that what we needed to do was alternating chapters. So
then the editing came into...
so then poor Anne had to take this beast, because it was 2 full novels, 2 full-length novels, and cut and paste and chop them down. It was 80,000 words each. Together, it's 160,000 words, and chop it back brutally to about 155,000 words. Can't take
you
it out.
trusted her to do that without interfering?
She hardly took anything out.
Wow.
It was so good, she didn't want to lose it. It was like going through the photo album, she said. It's all these nice scenes, I don't want to lose any. But I'm a screenwriter. We just taught... Well, you constantly, as a screenwriter, told, cut it down, make it shorter, So I went through and just slashed this beast down to about 80,000 words. And the hardest job, I can tell you, you ask Anne what the toughest part about writing the book was, she'd say, losing, there's really great scenes. And I would say, persuading Anne to let me take them out. But there's a couple of good scenes that we lost, but the book is stronger. The book is stronger for it. And then the trickiest thing, actually, you said the single trickiest, thing about writing the book, it's very uncommon for 2 authors to write a novel. Nikki French, that's it. It's just not common, and particularly for them to put their own words on the page. You might have one who plans, but one who writes. So we wanted you to feel there were 2 characters. We wanted you to feel that Zoe and Martin had different voices with different people, but we didn't want you to feel there were 2 authors. We didn't want you to say, oh, Anne must have written that. Graham, we don't want you to be thinking about us. We want you to be thinking about the characters. So we needed to sort of smooth it down so it was more like one author had written it. So it went back and forth a lot. The voices to be distinct, but not so distinct that they feel like different writers. And it was interesting.
Although I suppose people in their minds would do that anyway, just because if it were 2 men, then maybe... But you're a man and a woman, and the story is about a man and a woman from their perspective, so... You tend to just do it,
No.
naturally.
Okay, yeah, you're a translator, you're an editor. So you imagine that the women's chapters were written by E.L. James, the men's chapters were written by Philip Roth. You'd know there were two authors, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not Philip Roth and Anne's not E.L. James, but different authors have quite different voices, and we both write, I would call it contemporary fiction. So we're in a broadly the same space. It's not like one of us is trying to write Ulysses and the other one is, 50 Shades of Grey again, but we're not that distance apart. But we are different. We do have different writing styles, and it's surprising that's more than just the voices of the characters.
In the end of the book, you say that you're going to, that they are going, you see, I just did it, that they are going to do the Italian Camino, right? So?
Spoiler alert!
No!
At the end of the book, the final
Right,
day.
you're right. Well, I just want to know if there's going to be a sequel.
Yeah, look, we've been talking about it, and it's quite hard. I mean, it's not difficult to find a fabulous setting, and the two settings we're looking at are the Italian Camino, the Assisi Walk, the St. Francis of Assisi Walk from the same place, from Cluny to Rome, and also the Shikoku Walk in Japan, the 88 Buddhist temples. And obviously we would have to do the hard tax-deductible research of walking those walks. That's the easy part. The hard part is, what is the story going to be? Is it going to be these two guys again? Is it going to be a completely different story? How do we make it different enough that you don't feel you're reading the same book or that you were let down at the end of this one? So, we're talking very hard about it, but it's something we'd like to think about.
It's interesting. How come two people who didn't come from literature originally, I mean, both of you have had stable jobs doing something completely different for most of your life, right? And then suddenly you made the switch into writing. I'm interested about that switch.
Okay, very, very different paths for Anne and me. Anne had wanted to be a writer since she was 8. I persuaded her on our first, and she was writing stuff, but I persuaded her on our first wedding anniversary, when she was very busy with her job as a psychiatrist, that she could do that too. She had a dream of writing a book, and I said, follow the dream, write 1 page a day. So she did. She wrote 1 page a day for a year and got a book, and it got to the last step at a major publisher and didn't quite get over. She wrote another one the next year, got to the same place, and she gave up. She got a big grant to do research in psychiatry and decided that was really her calling, and then sort of moved on from it.
At that point, you didn't have any literary aspirations at all?
At that point, I had not written any fiction since I was at school at the age of about 14 or 15. Nothing in fiction. I mean, I wrote because I wrote technical stuff and so on. I was running a business in the information technology area. And I do need to tell a quick story here. So what happened was, back in 1998 I picked up a book, a genuine book that changed my life. It was called The Unkindest Cut by Joe Queenan, American film critic, and it tells how Joe made a super low-budget movie. And I wanted to do that too. So I ended up adapting one of Anne's unpublished novels, writing a screenplay for it, and we spent 9 months ruining our lives, and that of several of our friends, making this amateur movie, this 97-minute feature film, which was garbage. But we did, on Anne's 40th birthday, we hired a cinema and we showed that movie, and people sat and they didn't laugh at the wrong places or anything like that. But at the end of it, the acting was variable. I played the male romantic lead, so you can get an idea of the quality of the casting. No laughing, thank you. But at the end of it, somebody said to me, the thing was about that film was that most first efforts are unwatchable. That was watchable, and the only reason was you obviously used a professional screenwriter. And that was me. And she was a film producer, well-known Australian film producer, and that planted the seed. And a few years later, I sold my business and went back to school and started studying screenwriting. So that was me. I was 50. So I had not written any fiction other than the adaptation of Anne's novel since I was about 14, 15, and then I was 50, and I was starting a completely new thing. Oh yeah, I was very much set on being a screenwriter. It was for 5 years I was going to be a screenwriter. And I just threw everything at it. I worked very hard at it. I made about a dozen short films when nobody else in the course made more than 2, and most made none. And at the end of it, I had this script, and nobody wanted to buy it. Why did no one want to buy it? Because who's going to buy a script from someone who's just finished a university course, who's got no real credits to his name, when it's way, way safer to adapt a best-selling novel? And that's what I said to audiences, think about the last movie you saw. Big chance it was an adaptation of a best-selling novel. Job done. So I decided to write a best-selling novel instead. So I went back, enrolled in the novel writing course, reverse adapted, if you like, my screenplay for the Rosie Project into the Rosie Project book, became a best-selling novel, and we went.
There's a big debate in Israel, well, everywhere, but also here, about writing courses. And, there are the literary people who despise them, but then
idiots. I'll tell you right now. So you want to learn to do something, what do you need? You need some theory. You've got to know what you're doing. You've got to know what others have learned in the past. You need some practice. You need a language to talk about it so you can actually see what faults you've made, what things you've got right. Even if you say, look, first act turning point, or, lyrical sentence, or whatever it might be, you've got to have a way of speaking about it. Ultimately and practically, you need support from other people, ultimately, and contacts in the industry to get published and so on. A course will give you all of those things. It's not the only way to get them, but it's probably by far the easiest way of getting those things. But the people who say, oh no, if someone says like a course doesn't teach you anything, then they might be saying that this course that I know of is a bad course. But I did a really, really good course, and I would say I would absolutely not know what I know about screenwriting, and I absolutely not be a published novelist unless I'd done those courses.
So I think the Rosie Project is actually a great example of how it works, of why it works, or a proof that it works. But I'm interested in that sense. Did you come to the course with the idea already in your mind, and then you just had to, learn the structural points, or?
Well, careful on that. Just I think an idea is really important, but just learning the structural points, I had to learn the craft. I had an idea in my mind, but even the idea, I had to know what was a good idea and what was a bad idea. And what I learnt early on was that a really interesting character can be a really strong start for a book. That taking us into a world that we don't understand. Why was The Godfather so successful? Because it took us into the mafia world that many of us had never seen before. We've seen it a lot of times now, but wow, it was interesting. So I thought, okay, the world of autism and so forth, a character who might be autistic, but interesting. It's sort of guys that I knew and had worked with, that most of the other people in the course, so most of the other writers, didn't know and hadn't worked with because they weren't in scientific disciplines. So even having the concept, the so-called high concept for the book, you need to know what's a good one, what's a bad one. Then there's craft. How do you write? And we were taught, in the screenwriting course particularly, to write to Hollywood formula. But that didn't mean we were trained to write to Hollywood formula. We were taught the principles of it so you could break them. So in my book, The Best of Adam Sharp, if I can just deviate from it, I break some of the rules of a standard 3-act structure. It's a book in 2 parts. But in doing so, I'm conscious of what rules I've broken, and why those rules exist, and therefore where I might lose my reader, what might go wrong. I know I have to compensate. I know I have to do something for the reader to make up for breaking that rule. So it's just, as long as if you know the rules, you can break them. But if you don't know the rules, when you break them, you'll break them ignorantly, meaning you don't know the consequences.
So I want to go back to your personal life now. So you had to write a best-selling novel because you wanted to make movies. Yeah. And then that happened. And then what? You quit your job, your wife quit her job, you started to write novels, both of you, full-time?
No. Well, I quit my job. Well, I'd already sold my business. So I'd already quit the idea that I would be a great big capitalist captain of industry and so on. I had 60 or 70 staff, so it was quite a good-sized business, and it could have got a lot bigger. but I made the decision, but I still wanted an income, so I continued freelancing. But at the point that the Rosie Project rights were sold and I realised that I was getting some solid money in, I said, okay, I'm quitting the freelancing, I'm going to be a full-time writer. I mean, most writers never get a chance as good as this. I'm going to grab it and see what I can do. My wife has kept her job, but as a professor of psychiatry, but she only works 1 day a week. So it's super part-time, but the reason she's not here this evening is that she does blocks. She does 10 days straight to cover somebody's on vacation, on leave, whatever, and then she gets 10 weeks off. So it's a great way of going. She keeps the prestige of being a professor and everything, and she also gets some material. And it keeps her in touch with how psychiatrists work, and her character in her crime novels is a forensic psychiatrist, as she is, yeah.
At what point did she go back to writing and started publishing these?
Well, it was after we walked the Camino. She made the decision after we walked the Camino the first time. It was life-changing. She decided she'd go back to part-time and she'd start writing again. So that was her big call.
So basically, if I get it right in my head, then both of you, after the Camino, started writing. I mean, you went to writing school, and she started writing her novels.
No. I was at writing school before the Camino. So I actually took a break from writing school to do the Camino. The Rosie Project was quite well advanced at that point as a screenplay. But it was after walking the Camino that I went back and rewrote it as a novel. So that was a crucial thing that I did. And I think the Camino gave me the energy to go back and do that. And for Anne, she just decided she wanted to follow her dream and be a writer. So we did make big changes out of it.
So 2 writers in one house. Not always easy, but it seems like it's working amazing.
No, look, it's great. And I think not only do we work together on pretty much everything we do. I mean, Anne really was on the phone today and she's like, can't wait for you to get home. I said, oh, how sweet. Because I got some problems with my plot. I want to run them past you. But we love doing that. I mean, people say, God, how did you manage to work together? I say, well, call me crazy if you like, but when we got married, it seemed to me that we'd want to do a lot of stuff together, stuff that we both like doing. We both like writing. We do it together. It's a lot of fun. So that works out really well for us.
Writing and walking.
Yeah, and the walking, the same. I mean, something you do learn is if you walk for 87 days together in countries where you don't speak the language, or I've got a little French, and where you're not seeing the same people every day anyway, you learn pretty quickly whether you like spending time in each other's company, which we were okay, but we watched couples who, they would walk about 50 metres apart and hope they'd run into someone else to talk to.
It's a challenge to anybody. So I was wondering then, you said that in your writing process, I'm trying to go between your work and personal life so that it's not all personal. But in your writing process, you said that, or at least with this book, you said that you were thinking about the plot before you went to the second Camino walk. But then you also said that you were thinking that the most important thing for you is to focus on a character, and that you were both of you thinking of the characters, the main characters, the man and the woman who tell us the entire story. I guess the other characters came as you went on the walk.
Look, we both take a bit of pride in our minor characters. We like our and that again, it comes out of screenwriting to some degree, because if you write a screenplay, what you would love is every character to be played by a really good, even noted actor, and they're going to look at that script and they're going to say, is this an interesting character or not? They may only have a few lines, but they say, yeah, but they're great lines. What a great moment when he comes in and does that. Yeah, I'm prepared to do that. So you have to be able to write a screenplay that every character will be interesting and, understand their motivation and so on. So we work pretty hard on the minor characters.
But I suppose that if I try to think of the process of this book and then, let's say, the Rosie Project, because the other book we didn't read yet, we didn't have it translated into Hebrew yet.
The Best of Adam Sharp.
Yeah,
no, that's coming next.
It will come next.
It's coming next, yeah.
Next, yeah, but we still don't have it in Hebrew, so... And also I didn't read it in English, sorry.
Right.
But if I'm trying to think of the Rosie Project and the Rosie Effect and this book, then one is definitely character-based, and then this I would think is more plot-based. Or am I wrong?
Look, I think you're right. I think there's more plot in Two Steps Forward than there is in perhaps the Rosie Project and the Rosie Effect.
I mean, the characters are very strong here, but it seems like
Well,
they're
it's okay.
pulled by the story more than they define the story.
You know, there's a statement in the book where Richard the Australian says, "Remember, you don't walk the Camino walks you," and that's a little bit of a theme of the book. These people are being pulled along by fate, if you like. But yeah, look, I think something that was really important to us as we wrote the book, and I think most writers of any quality will tell you that you don't start out to send a message. You don't start out with a book and say, the message I want for this book to be is we've got to be more tolerant of, or we've got to understand Asperger's better. What you do is you tell a story as honestly as you can, and your own values and so on will go into the story. So in a sense, story themes tend to emerge rather than be planned from the start. We saw this book as a romantic comedy. As we wrote it, we realised there's a reason that most romantic comedies are about 20-somethings. Because when I learnt romantic comedy, I said there's only one immutable rule of romantic comedy, one rule you can't break. It's not the happy ending. It's not that they have to be of different genders or anything like that. You can break all those rules. They said the rule is that romantic love must be the highest value. Nothing can be more important than romantic love. Well, here's Martin. He's estranged, he's divorced, he's not talking to his 17-year-old daughter. He better fix that up, man. He can't just say, oh, guess what, I fell in love. See ya. He's got to sort out that. Here's Zoe, whose husband's died on her, and she's in denial about it. She's pretending she's got to deal with that. She's got her own personal issues she's got to deal with before she can move on. So the book became a book.
She's a woman.
Yeah, she's a woman. That's why I've got. Well, that's why we've got Anne writing, because, and I think that made it interesting from a romantic comedy point of view, because Anne we kept each other honest with the characters. One reason, I'm just deviating a little bit here, one reason, frankly, there's a vicious circle about love stories, which we call romance. They're not read by men. And I think one of the reasons that romance is not read by men is it's written by women, which means that they are very strong on the female characters and often don't give much attention to the male characters because the women who read them won't care. And then a man picks it up and says, oh my God, this guy's a cardboard cutout character. He's not a real bloke. I don't believe in this. I'm not going to read it. So he doesn't read it. And the publishers say, well, don't write for men. Men don't like romance. And round it goes. So for me, it's a love story, but the man in the love story is written by a man. He's a real person. And I think men and women are equally happy to read this and the Rosie Project and the other books. But in the end, the book, when we talk to our readers, because it's been out for a few months in Australia now, the thing they now say, the thing they like most about the book is the physical journey. They actually like reading about tackling the Camino, who the people are they meet, the physical challenges and so on. The second is the psychological journey. That is growth, what they have to go through and change. And the third is the little love story, which is now very clearly a subplot. And the attitude is, look, if it hadn't worked out or it does work out, it's nice to know, but I'm not hanging in there. I care more about whether they're going to finish the Camino.
I think that's actually one of the refreshing things about the story. At least for me with Zoe, I really felt it, that I felt, wow, she's a woman who has a whole, story of her own. Okay, there's also love, but she also has her own life and her own challenges and her spirituality and,
big issues, and he's not going to rush off to America and hook up with Zoe until at least he's got his daughter sorted out and her path in life right.
Spoiler alert all over.
But he has to do it. He has to do all those things. Will he do it? We have to see.
Yeah. I want to leave a few minutes for people to ask questions. So now we have about 15 minutes, if anybody wants. Yeah.
You must be in great shape. How old were you when you did this?
No. I'm in variable shape. Okay, I'll tell you. I was, we walked in 2010. I was 54 I was 54 when we walked it. And the second time I was turning 60. So I'd planned to walk into Santiago de Compostela on my 60th birthday, but we got ahead of schedule, so we beat it. But that'd be my plan. Anne said, what do you want to do for your 60th birthday? I said, walk into Santiago again. And when we walked it the first time, we thought, there were people who walked it 7 times, wasn't there? And we thought, and now we've met people who walk these things 30 times. And I thought, who would be crazy enough to do it twice? I mean, you've done it once, you don't need to do it again. And just after a year or two, the bug started to bite. We said, we'd really like to get out there and do it again. After 5 years, we did it. So I was basically 60 the second time. It's not physically that tough. You don't have to ever use your hands, if that makes sense. If you can handle uneven ground and a bit of mud and so on, it's really about just getting up every day and doing it. And we met people who were doing much shorter sections. So there's a character in the book who walks only a few kilometres each day, and another guy in the book who stops for 2 days at every place because he wants to appreciate it. So these guys actually end up walking together. So the old lady who's... So we met people quite a bit older than us doing it.
And also everybody frowns about it in the book, or in real life as well, but there's also a possibility of a taxi who takes your bag, and so you don't really have to carry everything on your back.
We got into shape doing it. I almost didn't do it because I had a little bit of a brush with death. I'd run a marathon, so I was in great shape. I'd run it up until the end of the marathon when I wasn't in great shape and I was in intensive care. And it was a bit like that for a while, and it was only a few months later that I was walking. I was still a little weak from it and so forth, and I made an effort to get back, but basically I walked myself into shape.
Wow. So did you do the Assisi afterwards, or you didn't do it yet?
No, they're the only 2 big walks we've ever done. We've done some 2-week walks, and Anne, as she was sitting here, would interrupt and say, yeah, and I want to say the Camino is different from all those other walks, that it's just that sheer length is one thing, so the end is never really in sight until well into it. And the second is that almost everybody's walking that for a reason different from just doing some hiking. They've taken a big chunk out of their life. It's 35 days typically to walk the Camino Frances, and that's the most typical route that people take. Well, 5 weeks is a long time to just say, and people do it because they're grieving, because they're troubled and they want to get... And you find it, you meet someone, you're going to ask them why they're walking. And they'll say, my partner died, or I've got cancer. And I'm thinking, this is something I always wanted to do. And there was one guy who walked in a kilt. So he's walking in a kilt. He was a New Zealander walking in a kilt. And he was walking on the roads. I mean, everybody does it in their own way, but he didn't like the uneven ground. He was in his 70s. He didn't trust the uneven ground. So he just drew a line on the roads and would walk on the roads. But his wife had died of cancer. And before she died, they made a list of things for him to do when she was gone. And this was the first thing. He was going out walking the Camino from central France. So there's so many stories out there.
If you had to give advice to a beginner novelist, what would it be?
Yeah, I know exactly what it is. I'm just looking at the best way of phrasing it. I'm going to give the look at that. There's novelists divide themselves into plotters who plot it all out in advance, and pantsers who write by the seat of their pants. They make it up as they go along. I'm not going to stop you being a pantser, but if writing by the seat of your pants isn't working for you, try plotting. I'm a great believer in plotting. I think it's the way to go. I think people intuitively do it. I think there are some people out there who say they write by the seat of their pants because it's sexier, because it's like, it's so cool, I just made it up as I went along and so forth. But my view would be, particularly, the biggest symptom you'll have is at 30,000 words or so, you'll run out of puff. You'll be writing really well and say, there's nowhere to go. Because that second act, that middle chunk, is the hard part. And the thing that's most often wrong in the middle chunk is lack of escalation, meaning it's like Hercules has to do 7 labours. If Hercules was a real person today, what are you going to do? You're going to say, I'm going to do the toughest one first, get it out of the way. Yeah, what sort of story is that? Hey, Hercules could do the toughest one. Are we going to really want to watch him do the easy 6? Not anymore. In a real book, he's going to do the easiest one first, then the next one, and build up to it. And that sort of escalation is what we expect in a story. And we can do it quite easily by shuffling stuff around. But if you're writing by the seat of your pants, making it up as you go, you'll almost certainly won't achieve that. So that's a popular fiction statement. But I think I like to think it applies to literary fiction as well. Because, look, it applies to if you want a story. If you're writing a book and you don't think story is important, then forget my advice. But I would say that if you want your book to sell and to be read by people, then story is an enormous hook, and I don't think it gets in the way of writing the most beautiful prose in the world. Story doesn't stop you doing that.
Second. I also think it's a very good thing to do, to write a fuller version. I mean, I think that this method of, maybe you didn't plan it this way, but writing two versions of the same story and then cutting and editing between them is a much better way of sometimes at least.
Yeah, look, it's, again, this is about whether you study this, whether you have technique, because you can say, if you've got technique, you can say, all right, I'll tell you what, I'm going to write this scene from the woman's point of view instead of the man's. I'm writing the whole book in the man's voice. This scene isn't working, this few pages. Why don't I try writing it from another character's point of view and see if that gives me some insight to it? Maybe I'm going to try to write it in second person rather than first person or whatever. And that's, you're having that big bucket of techniques. And you might be writing intuitively most of the time, but it's when you get into trouble to be able to name your trouble. I've just finished a draft of my new book, which is called The Rosy Child. So it's the third one in the Rosie series, and it's went off to the publisher on Monday. And it's about the child who might have Asperger's syndrome, and so Don and Rosie have to work out what the deal is. What would it mean if you got a diagnosis? So I've got them in the library talking about Asperger's syndrome. Yeah, Don says, I looked it up on the net, it says this, Rosie says this. It's just boring as hell, okay? Because you say, why is the scene boring? You know the rules of what makes a scene compelling. One of them has got to be conflict. I've written some conflict in, but it's not strong enough. So instead, they go to a seminar on autism where there's two speakers who are really angry, taking very different sides, and Rosie buys into the argument and Don buys into the argument. Now there's conflict everywhere. They're going to get thrown out. People are getting abused. And all the time you're learning about autism. And that's so your technique says, what's wrong with the scene? Why isn't it working? Here's my list of things that might be wrong. Aha, put some conflict in.
I was wondering what it's like for you to, now I'm really excited about the characters, but what it's like to revisit the characters. Like what draws you to their chemistry, to their story.
Yeah, look, it's interesting going back to a character, and it'll be interesting if we go back to Zoe and Martin after a period of time. And I was certainly nervous about going back to Don the third time because there had been 2 books in between. But, it took me about 3 pages to find his voice. And when I gave my first draft to Anne, she said, first 2 pages, garbage, doesn't sound like Don, then you're fine. So obviously I went back and fixed that once I'd got into the groove again. So I haven't had a lot of experience doing that. It's only with all those characters and that. But once I got into it, I found it quite easy. But I don't know how long you could leave it, whether it would work if I was to pick up Zoe and Martin again. I think so. I think I know these people.
Anybody else? So, any one last thing you want to share with us before you leave Israel and Jerusalem?
I can tell you that I'm going to be on tomorrow again on the closing panel, so that won't be entirely the last thing I want to share with you.
Good.
No, look, what I would... Okay, let me have a small advertisement for the book, if you like. The biggest impact you'd like to write a book that changed people's lives through the words on the page, that they read these words and they have an insight, they have a new way of seeing the world, and their world has changed. There are books that have done that for me in my life, and it's often just the right book at the right time. It might be La Peste, The Plague by Albert Camus. It might be One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich that came along at just the right time to say something really important to me in my life. And every author, I think, feels they would like to strike people that way. I don't think many people are going to be affected that way by 2 Steps Forward. But I think an awful lot of them are going to go out and walk the Camino. And I think that will change their lives. So I feel like the person who's giving advice on how to change your life, which is like, go see this guy, he's terrific, rather than giving it directly. But I think that Anne and I, as we review our lives, if we think that we've encouraged a whole bunch of people to walk the Camino, even in an armchair sort of way, but ideally in real life, and that brings change in their life, well, we're pretty happy to get that, if it's positive, change any way we can.
I think there's something though in reading the book that obviously it's not like walking the Camino yourself, but it's a little bit like it is. You know, it's like they say that if you watch somebody doing some sport, your body feels like you're actually doing the sport yourself, and so your mind actually feels like it was exercised, like the body was exercised. In a way, I felt that when reading the book. It took me several days to read it, and during those days I kept thinking about it all the time. I was really in there with the characters. I think not only that the plot is very convincing, the characters are good, even the minor characters, even the Australian couple that you were just talking about before. They're hilarious. I love them.
That's Anne and me having a cameo appearance in the book. They're not quite
really?
Anne and me, but they're very, very close.
Okay, great. I was wondering if you actually met them, but
No, they're
I
us.
didn't think you were you.
They're inspired by us, but and in fact they're in Tramai, which is where we actually have our house.
Oh, nice.
We've actually got the property in Tramai, so that was Zoe going to their house and getting some of their gear.
Oh, that's great. So, yeah, you visited yourselves. I mean, your characters
Yeah.
visited yourselves. So, and I felt that, in a way, I felt like I was. I mean, while reading it, I was convinced I was going to walk the Camino. You know.
God, it's dropped off, has it? You're not. Well, I have to tell you, we met a lot of nationalities. We did not meet a single Israeli, and we didn't. Yeah, and we
now
didn't.
becoming more.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
now
well,
becoming a thing slowly.
Yeah,
but
it was interesting. We didn't meet a. Sorry. Yeah, they're in India. Yeah. So we as I say, we didn't meet a single Israeli, to my knowledge. I'm sure we met a couple of people who were Jewish, but it's people don't always identify as such. And we only, on the first time, look, I think we only ever met 2 Brits, two English people. We met quite a few from Ireland, Catholic country. So what you tend to get is not so much practicing Catholics walking as people who come from Catholic countries and have therefore heard about it at school and so on. So it's a bit of a legendary thing. Right. Whereas with people from countries where this stuff is not taught, it's not. And look, I think I'm not religious, and nor is Anne. And I think that if you had a Catholic background, which I'm guessing not many people in this room do, no. But if you had a Catholic background, I think it would add an extra dimension to the walk, because so much of the architecture along the route, there's churches and there's crosses everywhere and so on. And if you had a real problem with the Christian religion and its symbols, that might not be the best walk to take. And in fact, Zoe has a problem. Zoe hates the church. She hates the Christian church of any kind. And she's like, every corner I go round, there's a big cross in front of me and crucifixes and so forth. Yeah.
I don't know. The part I felt attracted to was the fact that they could eat a lot of carbs. They were just eating croissants all the time, and
okay.
You walk so much.
Let me tell you the bad news. Let me tell you the bad news. The good news is while you're walking, you can eat as much as you like. You can't drink as much as you like because you can't walk with a hangover. Well, we tried it once, and but number of alcohol-free days, 87 days. Number of alcohol-free days, 0. We had a drink every night, and we ate whatever we felt like and didn't put on weight. In fact, we lost a bit of weight, got very trim. You can eat whatever you like while you're walking. And when you've finished, you've got a brand new set of habits.
Exactly.
And it's taken me about 2 years to break the drinking habit. So, yeah.
So I'm afraid we have to stop now. But I want to remind everybody here that the book is on sale outside, just outside. So you can buy it there. And I want to thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was lovely.
Thank you, Rana.
Thank you for coming.